Hello and welcome to a WTA webinar on insights that improve quality of service. It's based upon some document we're actually going to be publishing in 2 days, so I hope you'll look for that as well. My name is Robert Bell. I'm Executive Director of World Teleport Association, and if you're not familiar with us, we've been around quite a long time advocating for the commercial interests of teleport operators and also promoting excellence in operations and technology and business practices by those same teleport operators. In addition to that core group, we're also been proud to attract most of the world's major satellite operators, as well as the leading technology vendors in our business and others allied to the field. And together, they really are the team that delivers high quality of service to customers of teleports all around the world. Our webinar today is based upon the report that you can see on your screen, Insights that Improve Quality of Service. We've been doing reporting out of our certification program now for more than a year, based upon what we've learned in doing it. This particular one is going to be interesting because we're turning to our auditors to tell us the kinds of things that they see out in the field, which can be useful to teleport operators trying to get their business to be as good as it possibly can be. Just a moment for those who are not familiar with it about WTA Teleport Certification. We introduced this more than 3 years ago, probably even longer than that. I've lost track of it. And the purpose of it is to create, for the first time, an objective, transparent, and standards-based method for teleport operators to document the quality of their operations, but also for customers of teleports to select the teleport operator offering the right price performance level for their applications. And that's a decision that has to be made by the customer. We just provide the tools for that decision to be made. The process covers some 170 facility, technology, and operating procedures factors, so it's a very extensive one. And it results in one of two types of certification. Every teleport that enters our program goes through the provisional process in which they complete this online questionnaire, which is quite extensive, and basically deliver a self-assessment on it. And we then review that, score it, and if appropriate, issue a provisional certification to that company. It's available for a limited amount of time, has to be renewed annually. And most of the companies that pursue provisional certification go on to request full certification. And in that case, it's based on an audit by a WTA licensed consultant who takes the data that's been provided in the self-assessment, goes forth and starts checking off boxes to make sure that what we're being told is actually what's true on the ground. WTA's role in all of this, in addition to just developing the original set of standards with the help of our great set of volunteers in our membership, is to continue to coordinate the update and the upgrade of those standards, which does go on from year to year, as well as to operate the whole program, to recruit and manage our team of auditors, take care of the dispatching of the audits, and so forth, as well as maintaining, of course, the public certification database. I mentioned dispatch of the auditors. Typically, these are, of course, have been done always in person. It's a day and a half on site for the auditor seeing the entire facility. Right now, that's very difficult. And so we are adapting like everyone else and have begun conducting these audits virtually through video conferencing, and also the ability of someone to walk around the facility with a phone or other camera to show it off and answer the auditor's questions as they do that virtual tour. So it's working out. It's early days yet, but we're finding out to be working out quite well. Today's agenda is very straightforward. After this introduction, I'm going to share just some top-level insights from the report, but more importantly, then I'm going to turn to our auditors to drill into what they had to say into that report, as well as what other comments that they want to join. Before we begin, just incumbent upon me to thank organizations that make this webinar and our research reports possible. They are industry leader members, and we're very proud of them. They include Eutelsat, Liquid Telecom, SES, Intelsat, and Kratos Defense and Security Solutions. So thank you very much to all of those companies for supporting this effort. Okay, threats to quality of service. Threats to quality of service. Where do they come from? Well, that may not be where you think. Typically, when something goes wrong, we assume that it's those clowns in the NOC, or those clowns down in the out in the antennas, or something else. Some other clown somewhere has done something they shouldn't have, and that's why we're having problems with our quality of service. But of course, it's not necessarily always that simple. To explore more about that, we're going to speak to two gentlemen who know a good deal about this. One of them is Angus Blackwood. He's the founder and managing director of the Hawk Media Partnership. That organization helps its clients achieve operational excellence through its consultants' extensive knowledge and experience. Before founding Hawk Media, Angus served in a series of executive customer service positions for Arqiva and Kingston Communications, and earlier in technical roles for WorldSpace, ESA, and Airbus. And joining him will be Edward LaPosada, who's a founder and principal of Technology Consulting Labs, which is another consultancy with experience in integrating and installing earth stations, satellite networks, mobile base stations, and TV distribution systems. Before founding that company, he served in engineering and project management positions with Globecom, that storied company, and L3 Communications. So, gentlemen, welcome to the program. Let's share a couple of insights from this report. One of the most interesting ones was that what are the biggest threats? And our auditors did an interesting job of breaking that down into three areas. That it's about the robustness of the actual designed infrastructure overall, the quality that goes into the platform build, and then we're talking about the actual applications, the systems that support the actual applications being delivered to the customer, and also the maturity of processes, not just the fact that there are processes, but how mature they've been allowed to become. Another takeaway is that excellence is not consistent typically. In fact, very rarely is a teleport actually consistently excellent across all factors. Instead, it runs in themes. And of course, the downside of that is that between those themes of excellence, you can run into gaps that can trigger problems, and that's something to keep your eye on. Record keeping, well, it almost sounds unnecessary to say, and yet, of course, keeping records is always hard. But it's absolutely essential, not only to know what's been done, but to be able to go back and look at your historical record to learn how to do what you're doing better. One of the things that all three of our contributors to the report was quite passionate about was the impact of what we think of as the soft issues, the management style, team values, and so forth. They're invisible, unlike most of the other things that auditors look at, and yet their impact on the ultimate quality of service is profound, and we'll talk about that more in detail in just a moment. I thought this was interesting. Just some telltale signs of strengths and weaknesses. If you visit enough teleports and know what to look for, you develop some immediate information from just the first things you see in your first 15, 20 minutes on the site, and we'll hear about those. We'll talk a little bit about recommendations for improvement. Obviously, everything can always be improved. And our auditors got basically want to explain what they target, because some improvements are more expensive than others and more difficult than others. And so the auditors can share their viewpoint on that. And finally, the facility as it exists today, of course, is what is being audited and what is being certified. But an effective teleport is always looking at new aspects, at new technologies, at new customer requirements, and trying to think through how those facilities and technology and operational changes will be made, and will be made in a way that guarantees high quality. So that's the run of show, if you will, for the things we're going to be talking about. So we're going to come back to Angus and to Ed. Angus, biggest threats to robustness of infrastructure, quality of the platform build, maturity of process. Could you open that up a little bit and tell us what that really means?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So yes, in terms of infrastructure, I mean, most of the teleports I visit have got very, very, very strong infrastructure. So the teleports have been built with the future in mind. They've been built from the bottom up, and they've been added to by engineers who understand what the infrastructure needs to do and how it needs to be protected. What this means is that my experience is really that where infrastructure falls over is due to the less obvious reasons. So teleports might put in one-for-one backup generators, dual feeds into site, ample air conditioning to support one-for-one cooling. But it's where the single points of failure, for example, quite a common aspect I see is two generators, backup generators that can run the full teleport. Each can run the full teleport load, but they're in a single enclosure and there's no fire suppressant. So it's obvious to a visitor, but it's not obvious if you're there and it's always worked. But if you had a fire in the enclosure, you'd lose the whole teleport if you were reliant on those generators. So that's just one example of where you see single points of failure where it might not be immediately obvious, and teleports often focus on the data center or the rack areas, providing fire suppressant and water ingress detection in there, but they forget about some of the other single points of failure. So that's one area, Robert, which I think I've seen more than once, and I've done, I think, 14 certifications now. So it's telling that that these issues are missed, because it's probably not that expensive. It isn't that expensive to put some kind of fire detection and or automatic fire suppressant into a relatively small enclosure.
I'm reminded of an article I just finished in Wired magazine about a fellow who developed a company developed an insurance product for pandemics, and it was a great product. Unfortunately, nobody was willing to buy it because, you know, there's not going to be a pandemic. Ed, you want to throw, you've had some observations, of course, from your own audits in terms of the biggest threats to the facilities, technology, and procedures. What have you seen?
Well, when I look at the quality of service and the threats, you know, I've explained the fact that your quality of service is based on your capabilities. So the teleport is defined by the entire organization and how it operates. What capabilities and services can we provide? And like Angus said, you know, redundancy is key to any teleport. But the capabilities of power, fiber redundancy, security, fire suppression is key to keep your quality of service up and running. And in terms of the facilities, we talk about the availability of power 24/7. But again, that power in that facility isn't going to work unless you've got the manpower to support it with the technical capabilities. And then when we get into,
so that's what you mean when you're talking about how it's the whole organization.
yes.
Yeah, okay.
So, you know, quality of service is not one particular area within these teleports, but it's the combination of everything, and how you look at it, not specifically piece by piece, but how every facet of the organization flows, and documents, processes help to establish what that flow is. And when I do an audit, I look one toward personnel, I look toward processes, and then I look at the physical capabilities to establish the shortcomings of that particular teleport. Because every teleport operates differently. They have their own set of procedures, their own monitoring systems. So for me as an auditor, quality of service, I look at every line item in this audit as the building block for a sustaining teleport.
Yeah.
And then, you know, I emphasize mostly on procedures and processes. You know, we talk about ISO certifications, and I think WTA is instrumental in creating that environment within the teleport industry. I feel honored to be part of it.
Well, thank you very much, Ed. We're very honored to have you working with us on this. Just a couple other things under the stress to QOS that I as I edited the report, I really noted. One, I think it was you who talked about platform issues as involving unexpectedly, you know, poor design and configuration of earth stations, which tend to generate repeat errors. Can you talk about that?
Well,
Yeah. Sorry.
That is
I'm
who?
sorry. That was actually a question for Angus, but
Okay.
We'll come back.
Go ahead, Ed.
Go ahead, Angus.
Okay. So I think for this is thankfully quite rare. So again, a bit like infrastructure, I think platforms, earth stations, multiplexes, VSAT hubs, etc., are generally well designed, well installed. But where there are issues, maybe with upgrades, or there's cabling issues, or it hasn't been properly tested when it's brought into service, then that can result in repeated incidents. And sometimes these incidents don't show the real root cause. And so that's where, going back to Ed's point, the process maturity is really important, because fixing the incident, getting services back is not the end of the story. Engineers need to dig into the root cause and understand fully what's caused the outage, and then fix it for good. So there's a process called problem management, which is simply looking at incident trends and system issues over a period to understand those trends. And in my experience, only a small number of teleports typically do that in a robust and repeatable way. They typically don't do problem management. Some of the teleports very, very reliable and probably don't need to, but on ramping up of number of services, number of customers, that's when sometimes cracks appear in the infrastructure or on platforms, where root cause analysis is really important to understand and to do regularly. So that's what I meant by that, Robert.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. That's interesting because consistently now in our surveys and reports the past few years, the prediction is very straightforward. You're going to have more and more and more services running on the same infrastructure. You will not, unfortunately, be able to, charge as much for them as you might have liked, but nonetheless, you're going to have lots and lots of services. And so you've just described a potential problem with that.
Yeah, and certainly the with virtualized environments, software environments as well, there's a huge capability to run a lot of services over one rack's worth of equipment, and that puts an enormous emphasis on the quality of that rack build and the quality of the initial testing, because once you've got the services running on it, you don't want to bring it down to test the whole system again. You want to have it always on. So when you're adding new services, you need to be doing so reliably, and that's why the initial launch of systems and platforms is so important to be tested properly.
Sure. It's funny. There was a question that was asked of the contributors to our report, which is how common are these kind of weaknesses, and are there low-level issues that, if addressed, can add to quality of service? And Ed, you had a very snappy answer to that, which is that there are ultimately no low-level issues in a teleport. Could you explain that?
If you take the lowest point of your organization, which might be your technician, who's going to support a hardware failure, his capabilities could enhance or bring down your network because it's a lack of knowledge and training. So that's a low-level issue, right? Training, doesn't seem to be as high in the chain of quality of service in most cases. And the resources that you have within your company may appear to be a soft issue in the management style and the team values that we talk about. So for me, everything has a level of importance, down to how you're managing your network in the services. If you're using various VSAT platforms, soft issue as far as, well, the revision of that hardware hasn't been updated in 5 years. Is that important? No, it's not important. The system and services are working, but it does become an issue maybe a little bit later down the line. So that there's a lot of things that I see that people don't pay attention to. And the lowest level might be a fire extinguisher. And I look at that in a facility that fire extinguishers are available in all the places that it should be. That can tend to be a soft issue. And that's how I look at my audit. And when I'm going through a teleport, I look at the smallest thing and try to build from that point on. I know that they have redundancy. I know that they have power and security, but what down at the lower levels could impact their quality of service in those areas.
Very interesting, very interesting. Now, you both spoke again in your answers to questions about the vital importance of record keeping. Why? I mean, it sort of seems like obvious. Well, of course you want to keep records, but why is it such a key part of this job? Angus, why don't you go first?
Well, I think record keeping is important because when we come along to audit you, then if the records aren't there, we can't give you a tick in the box. But
well, that's one reason.
Yeah,
that's
not really the main reason, though. The main reason is, of course, understanding, particularly when you've got a growing teleport and everybody's very busy, and you want to know what's been done when, and if the maintenance was carried out when it was meant to be carried out, and if it wasn't, why wasn't it? And it's a matter of staying on top of everything that needs to be done. And yeah, it's the boring part of management for managers and for engineers. Record keeping is so important, and I think it's next to configuration management of equipment, very much related to that, where I've seen some really great installations, but the configuration management is appalling. So there's no backup to the configuration. So if you lose the dual redundant pieces of equipment, then you're completely stuck. You've got an outage until you can reconfigure, and that can sometimes take two or 3 hours to reconfigure equipment. So to me, I've seen it's the boring part of managing things, but it often causes customers real issues where the record keeping or the configuration management isn't right, and it causes an outage.
Interesting. Ed, I assume you got the same view.
Well, yeah, and that brings us back down again to low-level issues, right? Record keeping doesn't seem to be so important because things are working, but I see it on a regular basis in my day-to-day events. Record keeping, inventory, failure analysis, trouble tickets, all of these other things, the information that might go into a trouble ticket on record keeping. Do we have all of the fields that we need to identify a potential problem? And that's what record keeping is going to do for you in terms of, processes, configurations, and, failure analysis. So record keeping is key.
Question from one of our listeners, or a comment actually, that regular RF checks, radio frequency checks, are also an essential part of quality control in terms of avoiding interference. It's interesting. I'm not sure that. Well, I guess we do address interference in quite a few places in our questionnaire. But any comment on that? Making regular checks to avoid interference?
Well, my experience, the RF side of things is often managed by one or two key individuals, and they're generally very good at keeping their records on, particularly when it comes to carrier settings and interference. So I haven't seen many issues with that. What I've also seen is carrier monitoring systems. So the probably the more advanced teleports got carrier monitoring, and they've got it presented in the control rooms with automatic alarming. So that's also helpful for quality of service.
Right. So it's ongoing rather than just an occasional check.
Yeah.
Let's talk to the single most surprising thing I got out of working with you on this report was the emphasis that all three of our auditors who contributed to it put on what we would call the softer issues: management style, team values, culture, as major determiners of quality of service. So Ed, you're the man who sees the whole teleport as one organic thing. Can you talk about how management style and culture contribute or detract from quality of service?
Yeah, I have experience in many different levels.
Okay.
Because, as a contractor for teleport operators, or even in the case of a customer that has his own VSAT network, the management may say, well, everything is working, we're making our money, I can't invest in getting these additional spares. You already have redundancy. So, for management to spend money, for things that might not be important to them, might be more important to their team leaders in the organization of the teleport operations or the knock operations. And then the sales team selling things to customers that engineering has to develop. And until everybody comes together, and I've seen this in one of the teleports where when there's, change about to occur with new sales and new products, the team gets together, the knock, the IT security, all of them get together. So team values play an important part of this as well. So it looks at all of the management and technical resources within the team to maintain your quality of service at all times. There's going to be pushback from management. There might be pushback from the knock manager saying we can't get this right now, but maybe we'll plan to get it in the future. So there's many things in the culture of the people that bring quality of service to your teleport. And again, I've seen it in one of the teleports where they have a process in place to find the weaknesses.
That's nice. Angus, what about you? You were also passionate on this topic.
Yeah, I think it's so important. I mean, I think not just from the point of view from which Ed speaks about, but also from a setting the tone and setting the culture. So for me, culture of continuous improvement is so important for quality of service. And if management allow the time and the resources and the investment to support that continuous improvement mentality, then customers will see upwards availability figures every month. It's often about going the extra mile, and people will go the extra mile if they feel valued and if they have the right tools to do the job. And customers recognize that. There's nothing more than a customer appreciates than an engineer going the extra mile, and that really makes a difference. That's why the software issues are so important. You have all the tools and infrastructure and redundancy you like, but if you haven't got people who are willing to go the extra mile, then customers will probably go elsewhere.
All of the cultural issues, the managerial issues have been suddenly put under new pressure as a result of the global pandemic here. And I'm just curious if you've thought about, so what organizations are going to be able to handle that well versus ones that might not because of their culture?
Is that for me?
That's whoever gets there first.
Yeah, okay. So COVID has got all sorts of introducing all sorts of challenges into the workplace, and for teleports in particular, I think there's a real challenge around remote working and the ability to run a teleport or a set of teleports remotely from home, even by dialing in. I think some teleports have got that capability. Others feel very nervous, understandably, because what about supporting failures when they happen? But the world has been going more towards remote working, and I think the teleports that are geared up to provide that remote working as much as possible, you might still have a staff to knock, but your engineers will be working from home. Then they'll be the winners in the long term, because I think this isn't going to go away quickly, and therefore giving your teams the capability to run services and infrastructure remotely is absolutely key.
Well, it's also probably going to be a big contributor to productivity once we get past this.
Yeah.
Ed,
yeah.
What about you? Do you have any same observations, different ones?
When we first encountered, work at home, I gave a lot of thought to a lot of teleports and a lot of points of presence and everybody else involved, because now their throughput has to be greater than it ever was before. What was good then is no longer any good now, And those that have been able to sustain their services during this transition show a certain level of the capability to change quickly. I've seen this in local cable company distribution. My son is working for a company, and he talks about how they had to step up to get all the remote access in place, to get all of the pipes in place, add more throughput just to support their personnel. And that didn't even include all of the others on their network. So kudos to all of those teleports that have survived this and now have new procedures and processes in place because of this pandemic. So I think they've all learned quite a bit.
The trial by fire, yeah. The ones who
Yeah.
come out the other side do learn a tremendous amount.
Yes, sir.
I was interested in some of within the report. There's some interesting questions about sort of how you tell. How do you take your quick glance at a teleport operation and say, okay, I can see approximately what we're dealing with here. What are the things that sort of immediately show you that you're dealing with a teleport that's got its act together, if you will, in terms of quality assurance? Angus?
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, there's a surface level indicators, but there's also the depth and you know what's going on deep down in the operation. And you've got to be careful as an auditor, you don't make assumptions. But as human beings, we always do. So when you first arrive at a teleport or you look at the information that's sent over, there's something about the quality of the documentation. And I always ask for service availability stats, and sometimes I don't get them, and that tells me something even before I visit the teleport. And then going into the control room, you often can see, depending on the tools the teleport, the NOC has got to operate, depending on the how busy the operators look. And again, a quiet operation is probably a really good operation, but again, you need to dive into the detail to understand what's actually going on. So I think there's a number of indicators on the surface. You know, tidy teleport, people laugh at that, but actually, you know, well-organized teleports are, people have got time to clean up. That's a good sign generally. And they can probably find things when they need to in a rush. So I think there's a number.
I know a CIO of a major company who, before anytime he's going to let any kind of contract, insists on going to his vendor's facility and lifting up the floor tiles of the raised floor, because he says if he sees a tangle of wire, he doesn't do business with them.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes you walk over the wires, not under the floor.
Yeah, so it's absolutely. Ed, how about you? What's in terms of just your takeaway first impressions before you do drive down into the detail and make sure what catches your eye?
Well, I've seen I've been to Mexico and I looked at one, audited one there, and I've done a few here in the U.S. And the first visual I get is, you know, how is this going to work out in terms of really getting the data that I'm looking for. And it turns out that it really doesn't matter what they look like. It matters more of what their processes are. And I understand, Angus, you know, if they got time to clean up and they have a real pretty place, that's okay, but inside is what I'm concerned with. And so my evaluation usually is on the person that I'm interfacing with and then the people that I interface with throughout the day. And so that's how I determine whether I have to dig deeper into my evaluation, because a lot of stuff, and it goes to the security networks, a lot of the information that we get is verbal. It says, yeah, this is what we're doing. Is it the best for them? I don't know. But it's the answer that they give us. Yes, we are working on network security. Yes, we're working with facility security. We have cameras. We have access. So there, I don't make too much of a judgment when I first walk in. It's when I walk out, I'll make my judgment.
Well, I think that's true of actually all of our auditors. But I was always curious. I'm always curious about that because we can't avoid developing first impressions.
Right.
Let's talk for a minute about information security. It's one of those things that becomes more important every month, it seems. In general, what's the state of the art out there in the facilities you visited? And just as a sort of a framing statement, you know, some of these facilities are operated by very, very large companies, some PTTs and telcos, and others are operated by, you know, commercial independent, small, relatively small companies. And how do they each approach this whole issue of securing their services on behalf of their customers?
Good, Angus, you go first.
Okay, thanks, Ed. So there's definitely two types here, almost split down the middle. So the larger, more corporate teleports, or teleports that are owned by a PTT or a bigger telco, tend to have their act completely together, because they understand, they got big customers and they understand the importance of having very strong credentials with information security. And they will typically have ISO 27001 or SOC 2 or that kind of accreditation. And then there's the teleports who don't have the resources to be able to have that level of due diligence around information security, and they are generally trying to and using their the state of the art to improve their performance. I guess as part of that group, there's some who are falling well behind and maybe using password 123 on their authentication passwords. So it's a real mixed picture, and I've got quite a bit of sympathy for the smaller businesses that are trying to present a very strong information security front. I think there are a number of measures that can be taken around some best practice, which is generally freely available. In the UK, there's a framework called Cyber Essentials, which is a government-run or created information security framework, which is relatively simple and straightforward to implement, but it gives you the first step on the ladder. And I think that a lot of countries, certainly in Europe, have got similar government-run frameworks. So I think there's probably less excuse not to be good at information security, but just about all teleports I visit are taking it very, very seriously.
Sure. Ed, what's been your experience?
My experience is really just gathering the information on their network security, have some dialogue, but proof is in the pudding in terms of their experience with network security. And I think that this COVID-19 has tested their patience with a better understanding of the requirements for network security. Hackers are working, 24/7, and until you have a good infrastructure for network security, you're going to get breached and you're going to go down. I've seen it, and it's not a pretty place.
No, it's not. Yeah, we started, WTA started last year a series of reports on cybersecurity, and they have a very particular focus, which is for the small to mid-sized company, where they do not have big corporate resources to throw at this. And the question is then, what can you do? Where should you focus? What does management need to know? Assuming that management is not heavily trained in cybersecurity, what does management need to know to make smart decisions about this? So yeah, and the points you both made are absolutely right on within that program. one of the values of certification, and this is told to us by every teleport operator who's gone through it, is not just that they get a score and they get all the boxes ticked, but it is that the report that our auditors prepare also includes some specific recommendations for making things better. And it's like you both perhaps to talk a little bit about what goes into that, what goes into the thought process of making those recommendations for the sake of managers who've got to, maintain the highest quality of service they can, but do it somehow within a budget. Angus, you want to take that first?
Yes, and I think that's absolutely key. What you just said. It's the budget is obviously a big constraint for improvements. I always take that into account. So there's no point in recommending some measure around triple redundancy when clearly isn't required by customers and it would be expensive to implement. And I guess I would categorize the improvements or the recommendations into three areas. I would say ones that need investment, ones that don't need investment, and ones that are value enhancing and can be used as part of the teleport's proposition and are therefore have a positive cost benefit. And the ones that require investment are around infrastructure and spending money on putting equipment in. And I was trying to recommend the really simple stuff that can make a big difference, that is perhaps not so expensive, unless there's an obvious glaring deficiency in the teleport infrastructure. So things like if there's mains water near an equipment room, I'd say just put some water detection in there. It's not expensive and it could save your whole teleport from a very long outage. And likewise for fire suppressant, just a fire extinguisher in the right area can make the difference, make a huge difference if there's a fire or like. The second one is where there's no investment required other than people's time, and I spend probably most of my time with these recommendations because they are achievable, and it's all generally around process improvement and aspiring to operational excellence through continuous improvement. And depending on where, it's very much horses for courses, because depending on where the teleport is in their attitude to continuous improvement and the maturity along the path to achieving operational excellence, they get recommendations that suit them as the next step. So, for example, if a teleport doesn't have a change management process, I might suggest they put in a change management process, a really basic, simple, single-page change management process. If they've got a lot of outages due to change that they haven't recognized and there's no process in place, then maybe that's a good next step. So it's really simple, easy to implement stuff. So I go back there 3 years later and they've managed to implement 70–80% of what I've suggested. That shows I'm getting it more or less right, and that's my experience of the two recertifications I've done so far. And then the third one, value enhancing. So what do I mean by that? I mean, well, something that you can sell to your customer as a benefit. So, for example, if you've got a remote knock that could be used as a disaster recovery center for your primary knock, you can sell that as a benefit to customers. Most customers don't want that, but some do. The bigger ones do, and they're prepared to pay for it. Or another example might be providing monitoring to customers who are always calling in to ask about service status. Providing a self-serve type mechanism doesn't have to cost a lot of money, and actually some customers love it. And a third one might be something like consolidating suppliers. If I see an opportunity where teleports can save money, then I might suggest that they consolidate some services that they're buying in and go to one supplier. They'll probably get a better price for them and reduce their costs. So there's various value enhancing recommendations that can be made and have been in the past as well.
It's very interesting. Ed, what in terms of the recommendations that you tend to make, is it similar to Angus's experience?
Oh, my experience has been short-lived, but my recommendations have been kind of low level, because I see that teleports maintain a good infrastructure to provide services? Is it the best? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And some of my recommendations have been as low as, you know, making sure that your employees change their passwords. I've had a teleport that, you know, really didn't have a process in place to ensure that they would change passwords every 90 days. You know, other recommendation was, you know, here I am, a customer in your facility. I'm looking around and I don't know how to get out. There's no signs here which way's out. Those are the kinds of things that I've made some recommendations on. Again, because the infrastructure itself is working and they have some processes and procedures in place. So as time moves on, I may be making you know, stronger recommendations.
Yeah, but boy, when there's a fire in the building, you want to know which way is out.
You have no idea. The first time I brought that up to the you know, my customer at that time, the teleport, you know, was like, well, I'm standing here. How do I get out? Well, I know how to get out. You just go that way. Well, thanks. If I'm I myself, I will not know.
Right, right. Okay, well, the final thing that we talked about was the future, and I found this really quite interesting because, of course, we're, you know, when in our process we are looking at the teleport as it is today, and in your audits you're looking at the teleport and the people who run it as they are today, and yet the picture is always changing, and the requirements that are coming in from customers, the technology opportunities that are developing, are inevitably putting the teleport through a process of change. So what are some of the things that you have, in working with teleports as you audit them, that you've sort of told them they need to be focusing on as they think about the next levels of service they're going to deliver or the next set of customers they're going to serve? How do they need to be thinking about that in terms of maintaining and improving quality of service? Angus?
Well, I'm always just a little bit careful to not to tell teleports what they should be doing strategically, because it's a tricky one. But in terms of the infrastructure required to support new types of services, that's a big conversation, and we always have that right at the beginning, actually, when I first arrive, around what their business goals are. I think what I've seen is the best teleports probably have the most flexible approach to adding platforms and even infrastructure in to support new technologies, and that means that they've got the capability to do that. They've got the power and they've got the real estate to add on equipment rooms and more earth stations, but they've got an attitude where they're chasing down new types of business. So KA band, not so new anymore, but KA band terminals are obviously difficult to implement because of the rain fade issues and requiring 2 sites. But I've seen some really good installations, implementations with specific customers where there are a lot of investment has gone in there, and it's changed the face of the teleport operation in question, where they've actually adapted significantly to run dual site services. Another one is around media services and the amount of skills that are required, the different skills and specialisms required to run media services, and where teleports, you know, in 40 years of teleports, they've evolved a lot, and they're not just a terminal now. You know, there's a demand for a lot of value-add services. So that side I see quite a bit as well, where there's a requirement for media skills, broadcast engineering skills into teleports to complement the RF and the other networking skills, and that's often a challenge for non-broadcasting teleports to adapt to those skills, and we talk about that. And then I guess finally it's sort of waking up to the reality that actually there are a lot of teleports in the world, and there probably needs to be quite a bit of consolidation to remain competitive. And the question is, how do you consolidate? It's always a big challenge, consolidation, because you've spent 10, 20 years investing and building up a significant teleport and its infrastructure, and then you need to somehow consolidate and join up with another company or another organization and how do you make those changes? And that requires a lot of thinking about the future, a lot of planning, and some brave decisions around investing, shutting down some teleports and building up other teleports, which is a big challenge. So I have those conversations as well. Yes.
So it's not just a box ticking exercise. It ends up being about strategy, as technology always does. Ed, how about you?
I try to refrain from telling them how to manage and engineer their platforms. A lot of teleports have their preference of platforms they want to work on and work with, because time and experience provides that level of quality of service. But as time moves on, these teleports have to establish growth with the technology. I'm not ready to make those recommendations yet, but we would have conversation about what their technology is and maybe the experience I've had with it. But I leave that to their marketing and sales organization to make those recommendations to those teleports.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Actually, thanks to both of you, Angus Blackwood and Edward Laposada, two of the outstanding auditors on our team who are ready, willing, and able. Well, they used to be ready, willing, and able to jump on airplanes, but now they're ready and willing and able to get on a virtual flight and assess your teleport, both for marketing purposes, for having a certification that makes you an attractive property, but also to make your facility a better one. So, guys, thanks a great deal for sharing your insights with us today.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Robert.
Cheers. So, questions? Well, if we've had only a couple of them, and they got worked into the conversation, so we'll pass through that. But we do ask you to take a moment, if you'd be so kind, to fill out. There's an online survey after the webinar. Your feedback. Everybody always wants to take a survey, but we do too. Your feedback is greatly appreciated. It helps us design a program that will better meet your needs. In the meantime, enjoy your free copy of the report, which is downloadable from the handout section. And this is the end of our webinar. Thank you very much for joining us. This is Robert Bell for World Teleport Association.